this beautiful combination of fierce truth and abundant compassion. Like those two are like brother and sister. They go hand in hand and they work miracles.
Hello and welcome to the Dynamic Creative Podcast. I'm your host, Dylan DeMarcus, and this is your source of tools and inspiration for today's independent artists to activate, align, and empower the creative path to thrive with fulfilling and meaningful work that effectively pierces through the noise. In today's episode, we talk about the importance of men reintegrating back into their healthy masculinity by tapping back into tribe and rites of passages and the ways we can access them through transformational work and beyond so we may show up fully amidst a modern society that has often lost these ancient ways as the impact of not having them becomes more and more apparent in the world. How taming our inner restrictive voice of fear through healing our wounds and tapping into our core humanity in community can vastly increase our creative flow state. Steven's unique take on intuition and accessing information from connected source energy, pragmatic ways to navigate gracefully in partnership, and more. Join us. Today's guest is a man who I hold very dear to my heart, who embodies a breadth of wisdom and experience in healing and transformational modalities, who has personally helped and guided me, as well as countless others, to uncover personal power, freedom, alignment in relationships, and beyond. Based in Santa Rosa, California, and Maui, he's a lead facilitator at the Core Experience, as well as a men's coach focusing on relationships and communication. Is fluent in the art of intuition, and in my opinion is a complete ambassador of golden masculinity. My guest, Steven Kimmelman. Such an honor to have you, brother. How are you?
Hello, I'm well, thank you. And thank you for that introduction. I'm already feeling like, oh, can I live up to that?
You already do. So I would love to start with an important topic in today's landscape, which I know you're pretty fluent in, which I'd like to pontificate a little bit about real quick, which is convoluted masculinity and how it's gotten to be and its impact on society. And everyone, has wounds, pain, and trauma that we carry around. It's just part of being human. And as for men in our society, they're often expected to be tough and bro-ish, to stuff down their emotions regarding all of this ever-shifting complexities, roles and identities stirring in them behind their armor. And not doing that is typically frowned upon as weak. And this, to me, is a pretty toxic narrative, because when we bury our pain, our rage, our anger, our frustration, it comes out in damaging and reckless ways, leaving a path of damage to ourselves, our families, our communities. And true power as a man is tapping into your vulnerability, exploring your fear, your shame, your shadows, and survival strategies while being seen in them, and then realizing under all of that is actually a person full of miracles who is good, lovable, and capable. And I met you roughly 4 years ago at a weekend workshop in the Central Coast of California called Nobleman, where you luckily happened to be one of the lead facilitators there. And to briefly explain what that event consists of for everyone, men show up in the presence of trained women facilitators and staff who will step in for women in their life, basically. And men often, for the first time in their lives, get to explore what it's like to lower their walls instead of showing up with what they think women want to see and hear with all their strategies and whatnot. And men get to practice what it's like to be real, to be themselves, to be seen and vulnerable. And through this, they experience just how powerful it can be when you show up as your true authentic self, and how easy it is to connect with women and people in general once you do. And it also involves a groundbreaking rite of passage experience, and it rewires your brain to see new potential and to experience a new way of being. And I'd love to dive into your rich world, Steven. If you're willing, can you paint us a brief picture of your origins, as well as how your masculinity stood before discovering this type of work versus how it has helped shape it?
Yeah, be happy to. And you're right. What you described early on, it simply does not work. It's a recipe that doesn't lead to satisfaction or growth or
Right.
healthy relationships, it just never ends in a positive place. I think, like so many other men, certainly so many men that I've connected with, my origins with masculinity came out of that unhealthy way of being men and how our society looks at experiences, perceives men. And so, for my own journey of masculinity as a boy and then a young man, I essentially, like so many other guys, I kind of put it together piecemeal and kind of figured it out mostly on my own.
Yeah.
I did not have positive or helpful male role models, almost exclusively none.
Right.
My father was, well, let's just say, a very difficult man. And I really didn't like what I was seeing in most of the male elders as I was growing up. So whether that was teachers or people in religious positions or business owners, men in the community that I grew up in, politicians, I mean, just like everywhere I looked, it was like where I learned masculinity was about what I wasn't okay with. In my own mind, like not that, not that, not that. But I didn't really have any idea what being a man was supposed to be, what the key qualities were going to be, or how to get there. And I grew up essentially being afraid of most guys and men. I'll just tell you, I didn't feel like we were in partnership with one another.
Yeah.
I had friends, plenty of male friends, and I was engaged in all sorts of activities, but I really felt alone and pretty solo. And I often did not like how I saw men or, boys of my ages over time. I didn't like how they behaved. So that was a lot of the beginning for me. And then, I've been doing, as you know, sort of personal growth, transformational work for myself over, decades. And it's been a challenging journey, even with all of that work, because I was still essentially taking the go it alone, I'll figure this out approach. Uh-huh. And primarily that, for me, that was because I really never have felt safe amongst men. Even when I was doing personal growth work and I was doing it with other men, there was still always this sense that we weren't really in it together. Uh-huh. We were participating together, but we weren't really there for one another. And about 6 years ago, I had some pretty significant internal shifts, and I realized that I needed to do a pretty deep dive in my own personal journey of healing with men and the masculine. And even though, as I said, I've been doing all sorts of work for many decades, in the last 6 years in particular, I went after it with a vengeance, if you will. Maybe that's not the right word, but to obliterate sort of the way things were and the way I had been. And I needed a new way. And I got to myself to a point where I was like, okay, I'm willing to shift whatever I need to shift, or see whatever it is that I need to see that I'm not seeing or not willing to see, or, change behaviors or whatever that is. And so I began doing a lot of even more intensive work, specifically around what it is to be a man, the masculine, healing my own wounds around that with my father, with men in general, and it's changed everything for me. I mean, I tell people who didn't know me prior to that if you had met me, 7 years ago, you'd see the same person, but you wouldn't recognize me. They really wouldn't recognize me. It's been hard work, and I wouldn't have changed it for anything. It's completely worth it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I totally get that. And, I've had a similar upbringing as you, where there weren't necessarily very many secure male role models or anything worth modeling that. And before I serendipitously stumbled across the work, like, I had plenty of blind spots in my life also, where I was pretty immature. I felt insecure and incomplete in my masculinity. My romantic presence around women was wishy-washy. Sometimes I felt uncomfortable in my own skin. I had, a strong resentment towards my father, and I sought unauthentic sexual validation. My listening towards women lacked depth, and my confidence around them could be finicky at times, which ended up leaving me frustrated. And I had nowhere to explore how to move through these blockages until I discovered this work. And I learned, I wasn't alone and isolated in my fears and struggles, and I was able to help balance the masculine and feminine energy, let my guard down, obliterate, like you were saying, these feelings of inadequacy, and develop like powers of forgiveness and vulnerability, and really step into this power and clarity that I hadn't ever tasted before. And you were actually also a key component in that, in my personal rite of passage in the Nobleman weekend, which I'm super grateful for. So thank you for holding space with that. And,
you're so very welcome.
And how did you personally stumble upon Nobleman?
It's funny, actually. I first met the two women who were responsible for CORE, which at the time was called Celebration of Being, which I also love that name. CORE is, COR, which is Latin for the heart, and their work is really all about the heart and the strength of the heart and the compassion of the heart and the wisdom of the heart. So I met them briefly socially through a mutual friend, and they were doing the Nobleman, and they were doing workshops as well for women. At that time, they had one 10-month-long training program, very intensive training program called the Transformational Leadership Training. This was back in 2014. And that was just about to begin, this 10-month journey. And they met me socially briefly. And each one of them separately, after speaking with me, said, I've got to jump into their leadership training. It's exactly what would support where I was at in my own exploration of masculinity, healing, really deep personal discovery, leadership, manifesting myself more fully, all of that, right? But it's interesting. So I did my whole CORE experience sort of backwards and in reverse, because really you have to do the Nobleman first, and then you do staffing. And then once you've got that under your belt, then you can step into their 10-month-long leadership trainings. So I was really the only person who had done this, where I did it backwards, and they made this exception. So it was later that year that I did my own Nobleman. Often we use these phrases or these, sort of cliches of, changing your life and things like that. It was for that for me. I mean, the Nobleman, particularly during the rite of passage, I mean, the whole weekend, the whole workshop was deeply impactful for me. But I remember very clearly and distinctly, in the midst of my rite of passage, literally sort of taking one of my arms and sweeping away all that was sort of blocking me from stepping more fully into being a healthy human and a healthy man. And that happened in the midst of that. It's a profoundly healing workshop. I
can totally attest to that. And why do you think it is important for men to experience that type of work? And what are Nobleman's core principles?
There's a lot of men's work out there, and I have and continue to participate in much of it, which I'm grateful for.
Yeah.
The Nobleman is unique in that we come together as men to primarily focus on our wounds, growth, and healing around women and the feminine.
Yeah. And
so it is a workshop that is primarily facilitated and staffed by women. So this isn't men holding men.
Right.
This isn't men guiding men and interacting with men. And I mean, there are male staff there, as you know, but the male participants are basically surrounded and held by women facilitators, trained women staff. You get to really see who you are. You're invited to explore who you are as a man amongst women, and everything that shows up for you in that regard. Resentment, embarrassment, shame, insecurity, your own strength and power as a man amongst women. What does that mean? Right? How to communicate, how to be with your discomfort, how to be with their discomfort, right? All of that.
Yeah.
And you can't do that any other way. Like, you can't do that theoretically. You can't do that with like one other woman. You can't do that with a bunch of guys. You can only do that in the presence of lots of women and lots of different types of interactions with women. It is an exquisitely unique experience.
Yeah.
And so in terms of some of the core principles of that and how that comes to be, it's about knowing that as a man that I can be safe and be fully myself in be vulnerable, to speak my truth, to explore what my truth is, to explore what my wounds are, and to be seen and held and supported by women in a way that I have never, ever experienced before. And not just, as I say, one woman, but many women, to really be held and supported and just witnessed and seen and accepted for all of myself, for all of my humanity. And to have that rite of passage where we're going through it as men, but we're being initiated into the feminine. Most men don't even have a sense or a clue what that might even be, but to be a man amongst women in this rite of passage, some of these core principles, essential principles, are shared humanity.
Yeah.
And part of their way, what I so love about core, is this beautiful combination of fierce truth and abundant compassion. Like those two are like brother and sister. They go hand in hand and they work miracles.
Yeah.
Like truth without compassion can be very cruel. And too much compassion without just being real and being truthful is enabling, right? It's wishy-washy. It's not really calling you out on the work you need to do. And so this combination of this truth and this compassion in a safe space, and the fact that you're doing it in community, right? That you're not doing this alone, that you're supported by your fellow men there, brothers there, that the women are supporting you and holding you. And then the other key component of the world of core is what they refer to as grace. This mystery, this spiritual world that runs through us and also invisibly supports us. To do this level of deep work, in my experience, is also there is this component of this mystery of this spiritual way, whatever name you're calling it, that is helpful, that supports, and I can't do it without it. I really can't do this level of work without that grace.
Yep. Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, I think you're spot on with both of those principles. It truly is a miraculous space to be in witness of. And also today, I feel like it's safe to say masculinity has been pretty convoluted and misinterpreted. And Noble Man is one big step to help kind of like get clear with what golden masculinity can look like. I'm wondering if you know or intuitively envision any steps that we can put in place to help mend this misrepresented masculinity today.
Yeah, it's a really important question. And I think I want to take a step back as I'm hearing that question and reflecting on it, to step back and like, how did we get here?
Yeah.
To me, that's important. It's not not necessarily the only way of looking at it and approaching it. But for me, part of my own journey is, how did I get here and how did we all get here? And when I say we all, I don't mean just the men on the planet. I mean even the women. Like, how did we get to where we are with what masculine is on this planet? And because it isn't healthy, it isn't working, it isn't, nobody's very fulfilled by the typical, as you're describing, way of masculinity these days. And so I'll just briefly say my own thoughts about this. And that is, what happens now is that most men, and I will right now focus more on the United States and our society, although this extends elsewhere as well, but it does extend across our planet. But I'll just focus on our country and our society.
Sure.
Men go through their lives essentially solo, in terms of who they are as a human, who they are as a man. Now, as I said, I have grown up with boys and men all my life. I've interacted with them. I've been in groups. I've been in all sorts of communities and activities. But I also never felt like I was part of a cohesive, connected, supportive group of men, a tribe of men, if you will.
Yeah.
We're kind of figuring it out ourselves, and we don't have very many male role models. And we certainly don't have, most of us don't have very explicit guides or elders that are taking us through our lives, right?
Totally.
So we don't have this community of men, and that's actually, in terms of human history, that's quite recent. Of the span of many thousands of years, that's like many, tens of thousands of years. This is actually a pretty recent development
Right.
that we aren't tribal anymore, that we aren't
Right.
in a community of men where we are physically together on a regular basis, interacting, getting to know one another, really seeing one another, our struggles, our accomplishments, our differences, our similarities, right? And, that we're all in this together type of thing, that we're all at risk together, or we all enjoy the fruits of our anymore. We cannot live like that. Like it is an illness to try to live like that in my experience and in my opinion. And there is no way to mend it if we don't address that, if we don't come back to forming groups, to forming communities. And in the modern world, the question is, how do you do that when we are no longer physically, on the same piece of land together? And it's an important question that we need to ask and explore. But this combination of not having an ongoing group of men that we are a part of in a very real way, and that we also don't have rites of passage as men anymore,
Right.
Is also, to me, illness on a mass scale. Men cannot be healthy. I'm just going to, again, it's my view, experience, opinion, Dylan, but let me just say that in my view, we men cannot be healthy if we don't have rites of passage, and not just like one, but like multiple times. It is part of who we are to have to go through those sorts of challenges.
Yeah.
And so, and for all sorts of reasons. And in rites of passage, there is a community that helps you to prepare for it, right? There is a community that then welcomes you back when you have made it through your rite of passage, that can really see you in your struggle, in where you're challenged, in where you have overcome, that can see what your gifts are, right? You're not alone. You're part of this community. And without those rites of passage, there's a deep sort of subconscious or unconscious grief that happens in our psyches. Like, where is my tribe? Where are my brothers? I'm not supposed to be doing this, essentially going through life alone, right? And so one of the things that happens because we don't have rites of passage is that our psyches need it, is that we subconsciously create competition amongst each other, challenges, danger. We set up quote unquote dangerous situations amongst ourselves to replace what that rite of passage was all about to our psyche and to our soul and to our heart.
Yeah.
Which is not a good thing. And then and again, as though that weren't bad enough, we've also forgotten that those aspects of rite of passage were done, as I said, together in community, supporting one another, right? So to the extent that there was danger or competition, it wasn't so that I could put myself over you or, excel at your expense. It was so that when I come back to the tribe, to the community, I have something to offer you and offer the rest of the community, and vice versa, you for me. We're doing it together. So the whole way that we've created competition now, we've forgotten sort of the whole point of it in the first place, which was we still have to survive together.
Yeah, and it doesn't exist anymore. And in ancient cultures, it was a required commonplace for young men to experience and go through those rites of passages, and that's been completely lost ritual that isn't around, and it's such a catalyst to develop that healthy sense of masculinity to step into that. With a lot of these trainings, that's one of the things that ties them together. And from my own personal rite of passage that I experienced at Noble Man, I realize how powerful and necessary they are. And I was able to basically just evaporate off so much emotional baggage and limiting beliefs and everything that didn't serve me anymore. And this almost primordial cauldron of transformation that I, stepped into. And I'm still buzzing and feeling, lighter and clear till this day and liberated from this day, from that experience. And,
nice.
And as we go through experiences like walking through rite of passages and over time mature and gain wisdom and experience, I think it's eventually natural for one to feel called into leadership by sharing those teachings, so we can pay it forward and be a clearing for others on a similar path before us. And it seems to me like this is a path that you've been stepping into stepping into that leadership and, with experience in facilitating and leading men's groups as well as other types of groups. And, what's it like stepping into that leadership role? And do you have like a style and how you lead? And have you had to navigate any fears that may have been in the way of you stepping into leadership to, fully embody that role?
Yes. So for me, stepping into a leadership role has been a lifelong challenge, and one that I feel like is very much still a work in progress, and I'm perfectly okay with that. I have come to recognize that I was born to be, quote unquote, a leader, whatever that means. But as I reflect back on my life, it started at a very, very early age. I'm talking about like elementary age, where people were constantly looking to me for leadership. Anytime in school there was a group activity or, spearhead the group of some sort or the project, whoever I was with, they would all turn and look at me. And I wanted nothing to do with it. Like, I don't want to be the leader. I don't want that responsibility. And it wasn't comfortable for me. And then as a teenager, it kept happening. And then as a young man, it kept happening. And all sorts of scenarios and situations that often were just hilarious, frankly, to me. Even to the extent of, I'll just tell you this one really funny story. So there was one time I was called for jury duty, and I wound up getting on the jury, and it was a pretty significant, serious case. It was attempted murder, and it was quite intense. And so I'm on the jury, and we're doing all the things that we're doing, and I was having almost zero interaction with any of the other jurors. I just was keeping to myself, doing my own thing. And that's kind of how I proceeded for up until this point. And then at a certain point, it was time to pick a jury foreman. And so they had us go into the room where we all collect amongst ourselves to figure out who the jury foreman was going to be. And when that moment came, we're all sitting around this big table. Dylan, they all turned and looked at me.
Classic.
And I'm like, what? And it was like, really? Like, you don't even know me. I haven't talked with any of you. You want me to? And anyway, so that's kind of how my life has always been. So I'm slowly learning to acknowledge that and accept that and understand the gift of that and what's behind that for other people, not necessarily for me, but like what's going on for them that they would turn towards me. And then for myself, it's about, do I trust myself? Yeah. Do I believe that I am a good person? Do I believe that I can be just, that I can be fair, that I can listen to differing opinions, that I can be wrong, that I can, make mistakes, that I, all of that, right? Like there's so much that comes in for me anyway about what it really means to be a leader, that I can promote others above myself, if you will. And again, in this most recent 6-year period, because it's been a lifelong thing, but in this most recent 6-year period, this has also been a big piece of this journey, this healing for myself around men and the masculine, and also stepping into leadership. For me, it's been a combination of simply being more of myself. Like I simply am that. Right? So getting comfortable with that and being with whatever has gotten in the way for me about why I'm uncomfortable with that. So it's been a self-exploration journey. And then the other is the gift, like the offering to other people, right? In terms of when you are a healthy leader, it is a gift to others, right? We need leadership in all sorts of ways at certain times. And so if that is one of my gifts and skills, then not to withhold that. To offer that when it's asked for, or when I feel like I want to step into it, that I have something to offer in that way, and to be a contributor to other humans, to our, whether it's a small group or a larger group. Yeah. And it's been a real challenge for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, the way that you lead at core speaks for itself. So you're clearly doing some kind of work. And what you were touching too, just about being yourself, I think is giving ourselves permission to be ourselves in that space is really crucial. And also for me, it's just like obliterating that fear of being judged, fear of not being good enough. And you can get through those hurdles, then yeah, that authenticity really starts to shine. So this podcast is in place also to help independent creatives thrive. And, I'm really passionate for ways that creatives can perform more effectively in their worlds and ultimately become powerhouses of self-expression. And do you think experiences like, Noble Man, the Mankind Project, for example, can help generate a creative flow state to make impactful work? And if so, how?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. The short answer is yes, absolutely.
Uh-huh.
And the way I connect those in my own and how I've seen it in others is that when I do, and when I see others doing a deep personal growth work, transformational work, exploration, getting to know oneself well, all the parts of oneself, and being okay with whatever we discover. And I don't mean that being okay with bad behavior, but just acknowledging that, oh, this is an area that I need to work on, and I'm okay that I still need to work on that area. Like allowing for my own humanity, right? Like I didn't just, I wasn't born with, being, sometimes snippy towards my daughter, right? It's like, it's sort of experience my own wounding and my own, right? And so can I allow for my own humanity that is what happens sometimes? And okay, that's an area that I want to shift and change, right? And I'm going to do work in that area. But what all of that does, whatever the issue is, whatever the topic is, it allows me to really come to understand myself much more clearly, with more compassion and understanding, more humanity. And because we typically do that kind of work in groups, we get to know that we're not alone, that all human beings have wounds and struggles and challenges. And often what gets in the way of creative flow and creative expression are the voices in our head that are basically saying various forms of saying no to ourselves.
Yeah, so true.
No, you can't do that, or no, you shouldn't do that, or no, they're not going to like this, or no, this is going to make somebody feel uncomfortable, or, there's so many voices that are essentially saying no.
Yep.
Right. So what happens is that as we do personal growth work in community, what we come to find is we all have a lot of common humanity. And, you talked about like trusting yourself and, and not being so harshly judging of yourself. And a lot of that comes with me revealing to you in a process, in a group, in an interaction, my own humanity, and you simply saying, thank you for sharing, I see you. And allowing me to be where I am, and then, okay, and this is what my intention is. This is what I'm committed to in terms of shifting, in terms of learning, in terms of growing. But it isn't an unsafe space. Even if you're like, yeah, that's something you're going to want to work on, it still comes from this place of, and I have those things too. So I see you and you're safe here. And let's be human together. And as we get more and more okay with our own humanity, those internal no's become less powerful. Even though those voices often never stop, they don't hold as much weight, right? They don't interfere as much. They don't disrupt what's happening. And it can allow us to let go of that part of the mind that is constantly having those internal conversations. And when we can set that aside and just explore what shows up and not have this voice immediately come in and say, oh, no, you can't do that. Right. It's like if you get yourself as an artist, whatever your form of art is, if you put yourself into a situation where you're willing to explore, like imagine, you're a multifaceted artist, right? I mean, you have many different means of expression. And let's just say, I don't know, I'll make something up here. Let's just say you're wanting to create something as a tattoo artist, a particular type of an image of a sketch of a person, and you want to evoke something. And so you put yourself into a state where you want to imagine a situation between two people where somebody has done the other person wrong and the other person responds with a quiet compassion and open-heartedness. The person who was doing the bad behavior is sort of surprised, right, and shocked by not being met with resistance or being made wrong, but with this compassion. And yeah, that hurt me, but I see your own humanity, right? And so, what is the expression of the person's face who is met with this unexpected response? Like, how do you capture that, right?
Right.
And visually, right? So then, boom, it just starts coming out of you. You start to draw or whatever it is you're doing. If that voice comes in and says, no, 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 you can't do that, well, then it's cut off, right? It's in the way. You're done.
Immediately.
You've lost the moment. Right. But to the extent that even if that voice comes in, you just can quickly just slough it off and say, yeah, I know who I am. This is fine. And you let it flow. Then, man, the creativity that comes through you or any artist, it's wide open.
Yeah. That's
there's no no's present.
Totally. Yeah, when we can silence that inner critic, then really the sky's the limit.
In my own ways as an artist, of when I've been saying no to myself and what that does versus when I just say, screw that voice and let's just see what happens.
Yeah, totally. I would love to segue a tiny bit here and dive into your rich world of intuition and how you have 20 years of mentorship in intuition. And I had the privilege to personally be a participant in your recent intuition development workshop that you masterfully led with me and a couple other folks. And I'd love for you to kind of dive into how you interpret and navigate your powers of intuition. And if you could maybe just go over those core principles and in what you taught in that workshop and what your understanding is of it.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And it was wonderful to have you in the workshop. I loved interacting with you in those ways and partnering with you in those ways. Yeah,
I got a lot out of it.
Oh, I'm very happy to hear that. The world of intuition is rich. I say this often about certain words. This is one of those words that I will say this about, which is when anybody else hears the word intuition, we all have our own thoughts, ideas, experiences about it. Like, what does it mean to me versus what does it mean to you versus what does it mean to somebody else? I don't know, right? I've got my own experience and ideas and beliefs or thoughts about it. And I have no idea what that is for you or for anybody else for that matter. So I just want to state that from the get-go, that when I'm talking about intuition, I don't really know how you're hearing it, but I'll just say what my journey has been and how I view it and work with it and the gifts that it is in my life.
Awesome. Yeah, that is a great disclaimer because everybody definitely does have a very unique interpretation of it. So thank you for that.
Yeah. So yeah, as you said, I was blessed with. I've had many incredible mentors in over the course of my life, and one of them was a woman who I don't really quite know how to describe her, but certainly a master in the world of intuition, truly. And so I trained under her, was mentored by her for over 20 years, and explored many, many aspects of the world of intuition, and I still do. And it is a part of my daily living, breathing life. It's not anything separate anymore. It's just part of how I go through life. And so when I think of intuition, and there are many different aspects of intuition and different ways of looking at it and experiencing it, I think of it primarily as two different things or two distinct things. They often go hand in hand, but one is, I think of it as this idea that, there's in nature, there are oftentimes systems of trees that they're all separate trees in a particular area, but they've come to discover that they're actually all connected in one very, very large organism. Mm-hmm. Right. So we see them as separate trees, but in fact, they're co-experiencing together. Sure. In my experience, I think that's actually true with us humans. not obviously physically connected, but I think that in terms of our consciousness, I think we're one organism. I think we're not very aware of it or connected or in touch with that. But my experience, there is some aspect of this shared organism of shared consciousness, and so that to me means there's shared information, there's shared knowledge, there's shared awareness, there's shared wisdom. And so just because I myself haven't necessarily had a particular experience doesn't mean that that knowledge and wisdom and information isn't available to me. I mean, I can tell you just from my own life, Dylan, that if I look at it sort of like as a scientist, and I say this, I say this really sort of matter. I don't say this with ego, but the amount of sort of knowledge and wisdom that I have far exceeds the actual life experience that I've had in this time.
Yeah.
Like if you, as a scientist, if I look at all the different experiences I've had, those dots don't connect. How did I get this level of awareness and knowledge or wisdom? And so I think there's something else at play just from our, day-to-day, moment-to-moment experience. And I think it's this shared, what's available to us, this shared knowledge, this shared wisdom. And so for part of the way I see intuition, it's accessing that.
Yeah.
And so that's one part of it. And the other part of it is that, to me, intuition is often just information. When you get when you get a gut feeling, when you get, like somehow you just sense that something's going to happen, right? It's almost like what is going to be in the future, whether it's, 30 seconds from now or tomorrow, or whatever that is. Like you're thinking about a conversation you're going to be having with somebody tomorrow, and then all of a sudden you get this hit like, oh, I better not say that. Now, you could look at that and say, oh, well, that you could look at your own experience and know that person, and so you could expect that they would respond a certain way. Yeah, as again, like sort of from a scientific approach, I could look at that and say, well, maybe that's what's going on. But sometimes it has nothing to do with that at all. Sometimes it's a completely new topic, or that you want to bring up, or phrasing that you might use, and all of a sudden you get this hit like that's not going to go over. And even though you've never said that to them before, right? You get this gut hit about that. So and what is that? And for me, part of it is, again, from my own experience, I have helpers. I've got guides that are not embodied, and I think, frankly, that we all do, whether we're in touch with it or not. I think every single human on this planet, we have helpers, we have guides, and they're supporting us and helping us and guiding us to the extent that they can whisper in our ear, so to speak. And it's not really necessarily how it happens, but just the idea that they're offering their suggestions.
Yeah.
To the extent that we can learn to listen. To that. To me, that's also intuition. And so a big part of intuition is learning how to be quiet, learning how to sort of silence our own mind. It's a never ending, production of thoughts, right? And it's constantly trying to be in control and figure things out. And it's just like nonstop talking, right? So to the extent that we can get that to calm down and to get quiet, and we can learn to listen, then our helpers and our guides, when they're talking to us in whatever way they are, we can actually hear it. And all of a sudden, we get these hits about things to do or things to not to do or things to say or not to say or paths to take or not to take.
Absolutely. I love your take on that metaphor of us being a larger organism connected like trees and tree roots and even mycelium, and how we really are connected on an energetic level there. And that kind of like really clicks for me with the intuition there. And I've personally had a handful of mystical experiences from, whether it's experimentation with psychedelics or lucid dreams, breathwork, tantra and beyond. And that's shaped me and equipped me with rich experiences that I've been able to translate into my own personal creative expressions and navigate myself through life. And you have no shortage of these experiences yourself, clearly. And you were mentioning, since, you were a child all the way up until today, that you've experienced your own series of intense and profound personal spiritual experiences, which have, I'm sure, drastically affected how you showed up in the world. And can you share with us some of those valuable experiences you've had, from the one that you mentioned to me that when you were, 3 years old, all the way up to your recent one, which was like with the veils being lifted, and like, how has that helped align your trajectory in life?
Yeah, I have been blessed with many, many mystical experiences, and or whatever name we want to give them, and typically not. Most of the ones that are the most profound for me were not involved with any sort of induced vehicle, if you will. And I just also want to circle back, because I connect intuition to this as well, because very often a lot of these experiences are connected with intuition. And in terms of how I go through my life, I'm just a big fan of all of us having intuition become more a part of our daily life, our vocabulary, our way of walking through the world. And a lot of it has to do with trusting ourselves, trusting our own inner being. And again, part of that is the practice of learning how to listen, and the trusting of that even in the face. Often intuition is sort of knowledge or information or ideas that are contrary to what our mind is looking at and is presenting to us, right? And so we have to set aside what our mind is sort of quote unquote logically or linearly seeing or experiencing, and saying, well, no, this is the path I'm going to take right now. That feels more true to me, and that to me is so important for us as human beings. And so all of these other sort of spiritual experiences or mystical experiences I've had are the same realm of seemingly not logical or coming out of the blue, and yet they speak to a profound truth beyond maybe what I have learned or what the mind can make sense of. And so one of those experiences you just referred to was what I call the lifting of the veils. It actually was the experience that triggered this much more intensive last 6 years of work for me. Maybe we can get to the 3-year-old one another time.
Yes, no problem.
But so I was in a committed relationship, and it was towards the end of it. We both knew that. We were sort of mutually like, it's starting to come apart. And so she and I were just having a conversation about that, and how we're trying to like figure things out and work things out. And in the course of that conversation, she had said something to me that I didn't know what to make of it. And I literally sort of cocked my head to one side like a dog would. And I kind of went, huh? Like, it was literally that much of a disruptive comment. Like, wow, I really need to think about that and reflect on that. And then the conversation continued, and then we, she went into another room or whatever the situation was. And I was just sitting there, like, being with this comment. All of a sudden, I see, and when I say see, I mean I literally was seeing veils in front of my eyes. I don't have any explanation for that other than I can just tell you this is what was happening. I was like, there's like these physical veils in front of my eyes, and there was a whole lot of them. They were all various amounts of sheerness. They were all white. Some were quite thin, some were quite thick. Everything in between. They were kind of sort of, some were like spider webby like, and others were quite opaque and could barely see anything through them. And there was a whole lot of them. And they were kind of like, it was like they were attached to the top of my head, and they were just sort of in front of my eyes. And I literally said to myself, where did these come from? Because I was seeing them.
And you're sober.
Totally sober. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Totally sober.
Yeah.
Just another day in the life, man. I have an interesting life. What can I tell you?
Yeah, clearly.
And then I hear, and when I say hear, it's not an audible voice, but it's like communicating telepathically. So I'm hearing the words, but it's not from sound. It's just like if there was a way for us to communicate without sound, but we could hear each other's words. So this is what I'm hearing. And so one of my guides, a guide that's been with me all my life, says to me that each one of these veils represents a different aspect or an area of my life. Mm-hmm. And this is how I'm seeing and perceiving that area of my life. So whether it was self-perception, my sexuality, money, who I am as a family man, who I am as a friend, my work life. I mean, just like one after the other, right? It was like all these different aspects.
Yeah.
And the thickness or the thinness or the opacity or the webbiness was speaking to how much sort of interference, if you will, the veil was causing me. So if it was very thick and fairly opaque, basically my guide was saying, you're not really seeing this area of your life very clearly at all. Like you've got a lot of either misperceptions or blind spots, or you just, interpreted things sideways or whatever that is, but you are not seeing this part of your life clearly. Now, it doesn't mean that I wasn't looking at that part of my life because I've done a lot of work, but at that moment in time, he's just straight out saying, in this area of your life, there's a lot of opacity there and you're not seeing it very clearly. And then there were others that were really thin and it's like, yeah, you've done a lot of work there and that's an area that you're seeing quite clearly and still obviously not like perfectly so. But anyway, so it was just revelatory. It was fascinating. And I was instantly grateful. Like, first of all, oh my God, like really? Like this is how I'm going through the world, seeing the world? Yes, this is how you're seeing the world. Okay. And thank you for showing me that. And thank you for being so distinct about which areas and how much and all of that. Like having knowledge means I can do something with it. If I can see it, I can work with it. Right. So I was grateful, but I was also just like, wow, like what do I do with this? So then my guide, one at a time, lifts up a veil and pulls it away from my eyes so that for that area of my life, I'm now seeing that particular area of my life clearly without this interference, without these distortions. And one at a time, he would lift up another veil and then another one until all of those veils were lifted up back over my head so that there was no interference. And it was just like, oh, so this is what to go through life, interference without attachment, without misperceptions, without the ego, without all of the stuff that gets in the way. And I just want to say that I don't live my life like that. I don't live my life thinking that I see everything clearly. I'm nowhere near that. I'm not, and I don't even strive for that, honestly. But it was helpful to be able to see where there was clarity and where there wasn't a lot of clarity in areas of work. And my life has never been the same since.
Wow. Yeah, I think that sounds like the next step to be obviously to somehow incorporate that experience in a pragmatic way with workability to your life.
Yeah.
You clearly have some intuitive abilities as well as also, pragmatic, concrete experiences and trainings that seem to be a nice balance there and pretty ripe also to embody in the world of coaching and counseling. And you recently stepped into the world of being a communication coach for men, helping them communicate effectively with their wife or girlfriend and specializing in anxiety and fear of effectively speaking your truth in any situation, which is called Your Masculine Truth. Can you unpack how this came to fruition with this new endeavor of yours and dive into the support that you're offering with it?
Yes, I'd be happy to. And as with everything else in my life, it seems like it was its own journey and has been. I was never imagining working with men. It was never on my radar. It was never a desire or a goal. I knew I wanted to help people, help myself, but help people. And I didn't exactly know how that would take shape. As I said, most of my life, I've had a very challenging relationship with men in the masculine. I wanted to be in better relationship with men, but I didn't know how to go about doing that. And one of my other great mentors at one point saw something in me where she had said in terms of my future, and she said, oh, you're going to be working with men. You're going to be helping and guiding men.
Mm.
To which I, at that moment in my life, I literally laughed out loud, kind of looked up and said, "You've got the wrong guy.
Uh-huh.
I don't even like men," which
Uh-huh.
wasn't exactly true, but it was kind of like, yeah, no, thanks, but no thanks.
Uh-huh.
And I left it at that. And then, I don't know, maybe 6 or 9 months later, I had a similar experience where another person had this vision, and they, like, almost word for word said the same thing. Oh, you're going to be working with men. You're going to be teaching and guiding men. And I had the exact same response again. I still was not there yet. I was like, no, you got the wrong guy. But then as I continued sort of reflecting and contemplating, I came to realize that it totally makes sense that I would be, that given my own wounds and my own journey and my own challenges with, particularly in speaking my truth with the women in my life, that it totally made sense. And more importantly, and even that my mind would finally make sense of it, but more importantly was that I finally woke up and realized that I kept sort of waiting for men to show up in a different way, right? I would do all this work and do all these things, and there's rarely ever men at personal growth workshops and things like that, and men on the street. And I just was, for years, for most of my life, I'm like waiting, when are the men going to finally shift? And I finally woke up and realized, oh, maybe I'm supposed to be one of the people that helps men become the kind of man that I want to hang out with and be with.
Right.
Take responsibility for the world that I want as it relates to men. And so that has also been a part of this 6-year journey for me. So I've done, first and foremost, my own work, right? It's like do my own deep dive work so that I can be as clear as I can be in my role in working with and guiding and supporting men. And I have been, and I continue to do that. I'll do that for the rest of my life. It's so important to me. And with regards to what I'm doing with men now is, I've got a 4-month program for men in relationship. It's a communication breakthrough course, and it teaches men how to speak their truth and to be more appreciated and loved. And it's speaking your truth in any and every situation, right? It's like, and what does it take to really do that? And it's not, as I said, speaking your truth without compassion, because that can lead to cruelty. But really, it's all about, what do I need and want as a human? What do I need and want as a man? What do I need and want as a romantic partner? How do I communicate that effectively? How do I do this and be in partnership with my woman? How do I invite that from her, even if it's challenging for me, right? It's like, how do I really be a good partner without giving up my own needs, my own truth, and being okay with that? And so that's what the program's all about. It's a deep dive work program for 4 months. I love working with men in this realm. It ultimately affects every aspect of your life,
Yeah, amazing. And I want to acknowledge you for having the insight and the courage to turn your wound into your strength. And I think a lot of this work ties that together. Like, our core wounds, when looked at with clarity, can actually become our biggest gift and strength. And I know that's one thing that I've slowly been discovering, which has completely revolutionized my life personally. And since we're on the topic, as you know, I mean, relationships take work, and they need to be nurtured consistently. To think otherwise is like pretty naive. And I know everyone in romantic relationships, including myself, initially it's great. And then when the honeymoon phase wears off, like the hurdles start to appear. And what do you think a few of the main hurdles are today that men face in relationships, and how do you think we can navigate around those? And I'm sure that ties into some of your coaching as well.
There are many challenges and hurdles. I'll answer that and speak to that from two different perspectives. First, there's the go it alone way of being and doing life, and again, that does not work. Mm-hmm. So I could not have done the work that I've done and become the man and the partner that I am and continue to become without support and community and ongoing support and in that regard. So first and foremost, it's, I take full responsibility. It's my journey. It's my work to do, and I can't do it alone.
Yeah.
And so part of it is to create. You may have people in your life already, men and women in your life already, who can take on that role to be a part of that community for you as you're navigating your challenges in your relationship. It may be new people and new avenues, but first and foremost, the notion that if you've got a notion that you're going to do this on your own, sort of in secret, you've already set yourself up for failure. It will not work. And so part of that is about being vulnerable, right?
Yeah.
And there's that word used early on, right? We treat the word vulnerable like it's a weakness and to be avoided at all costs and icky and all sorts of things, right? If you want a healthy relationship, both parties or whatever the relationship is need to bring their humanity to it. And so when I think of the word vulnerable, I equate it to humanity, to my humanity, to what makes me human, because it also makes you human as well. Embarrassment, fear, shame, pride, all of it. Yeah. Like, we're humans. This comes with the territory. And if we try to push those things away, pretend that they're not there, or in some way negate them, then we're cutting off part of our humanity. And I'm not allowing it for myself, or I'm not allowing it for you. And all of a sudden it interferes, it gets in the way, because at some point those things are going to show up in one or both people. And if I'm not allowing it or negating it, then how do I be with it? How do I deal with it? How do I support the other person or allow myself to be supported? So to be vulnerable. And what does that mean as a man to be vulnerable? And part of it is, well, I need safety first and foremost. Right? So if I'm going to do this work, I need a safe place to do it. So whether that's one-on-one work, if you're working with a therapist or you're working with a coach or you're doing a workshop or, whatever that is, it's like, we can't go to the places of vulnerability that we need to go to if we don't feel safe. Right. And so part of it is, how do I get to a place where I can feel safe in any of the work that I would be pursuing? Mm-hmm. And then as I feel that there is safety there, then I can lean into, dip my toe into saying something that I wouldn't necessarily say, revealing something that I wouldn't necessarily reveal about myself, and then testing it, right? Okay, am I still safe? Right? Did they throw stones at me, or am I still okay? And and I'll take another step in further. So it's this incredible combination of being vulnerable and really a fierce courage. It takes immense courage, especially for us men in our society today, to be revealing, to be vulnerable. I mean, there's so many things that are against us, so many things. And I don't want to downplay the amount of courage that it takes for a guy to even reveal a little something that is embarrassing or shameful. Sure. But that's only a part of it, but there's no other way to get. Yeah. We cannot be vulnerable with our partners, revealing with our partners. They don't know us. Yeah. And if they don't know us, there's no intimacy. Or not the level of intimacy that ultimately brings forth an extraordinary relationship, right? Yeah. So those are some things. Yeah.
I mean, sharing yourself is really the catalyst of transformation. And it takes work and sacrifice every day. And you're really spot on. I can't wait to watch your men's coaching practice unfold based on all the valuable insights you've already shared with us. And before we let you go, I want to just deeply acknowledge you for the work you do and the plates that you have stepped up to and continue to step up to, and the lives you touch, and the relentless drive to not only healing yourself and others. You're a really grounded and wise gift to us, and it's just a pleasure to know you, man.
Thank you, Dylan.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you very much.
And I appreciate your generosity with us today. And is there anything you would like to share with the listeners of, what you're up to in the community? Any new endeavors, personal projects, business offerings, or services in your world right now, as well as the best ways that we can get a hold of you?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for offering that. I think Dylan, first and foremost, and I'm saying this to you, but I'm also saying it for your listeners, I want to thank you. Meeting you 4 years ago has been another important piece of this journey that I'm on. You are a really extraordinary human being and man. And in my own journey of healing with men and the masculine, and to come upon you and then to have more interactions with you over these last few years, I feel honored and blessed, truly. So I really want to thank you for who you are and what you're up to and what you're doing, doing this podcast and your passion behind it and your purpose behind it, and so many of the other things you do in your life. I'm not kidding. I feel deeply, deeply grateful that you walked into the room that day, and we have the connection that we continue to grow at this point. So, blessings to you, brother.
I thank you so much. That means a lot to me. I'm making me feel some type of way. So I appreciate that. Takes one to know one, man. So,
so yeah, in terms of, what I'm up to, I mean, many things, but in particular, my primary focus these days is with men and our healing, our growth, our evolution, this 4-month program that I've created, and there'll be more, but right now this is really what I'm very passionate about, helping men to really know their needs and wants, to speak their truth, to do it in a healthy, effective way, to be more in partnership with their partners. I'm very passionate about that for men. Essentially, people can just come to my website. I have a free guide. It's called, for guys, it's called 5 Things You Think You're Doing Right When Talking to Your Wife or Girlfriend That Are Probably Making Things Worse.
Awesome.
And what to do instead. So, so if that's something that you're curious about, you can just go to my website. It's stevenkimmelman.com/dynamic creative. Right? So stevenkimmelman.com/dynamic creative. And you can just grab a free copy of that, or just reach out to me and if you want to just have a conversation, explore what you're up to and what's going on for you. And if I can be a support and a help, I would love to and be happy to. And if I feel like there's another thing for you to focus on, or somebody else who would be helpful to you, then I'm happy to direct you to other resources. I'm such a strong stand now for men being healthy.
Aho, I feel that. Well, I appreciate that, Steven, and I'll make sure to put all that in the show notes. And thank you so much for your time, and I wish you the best.
Thank you, Dylan.